Let's start in the Middle East. The authorities in Israel have said in the last hour or so that the IDF forces have begun what they call extensive ground operations in the north and the south of the Gaza Strip. Live to Chris Doyle, Director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding, commentator on Middle Eastern politics. Hi, Chris.
Good afternoon, Andrew.
What's Israel trying to achieve here?
Well, Israeli leaders have threatened this expanded military operation in Gaza for some weeks now. They called up reservists and they said that they would initiate it after the completion of President Trump's tour of the Middle East, which has just finished. And the stated aim, the stated goal of the operation is to defeat Hamas and to force it to surrender. But what is also clear, and I think many Israelis are seeing this, it's also yet another admission that the Israeli leadership has effectively abandoned those hostages that remain in Gaza, that they don't see any prospect of getting them released, and that they would prefer to embark on massive military operations in order to, in their view, destroy Hamas. Against that, of course, for Palestinians in Gaza, this is an utter nightmare. They have been trying to survive under a complete siege imposed by Israel as a stated policy ever since the 2nd of March. That's 77 days. And it means that there's no food, water, fuel, medicines, no aid of any sort that has been allowed into the Gaza Strip. And we have seen so many warnings from the United Nations agencies, humanitarian agencies, including Tom Fletcher, the head of UN OCHA, the UN aid agency, saying last week to the Security Council that you have to prevent genocide in Gaza. It was a chilling speech.
Very stark warning that we had at the start of last week. So, I mean, on the one hand, Israel could be just forcing Hamas to the negotiating table, trying to get those hostages released and operating in this way to achieve that. At the other end of the spectrum, they could actually be trying to take over the entire Gaza Strip and force hundreds of thousands of people to leave it.
It didn't need to have this military operation to have Hamas at the negotiating table. Even as we speak, there are negotiations in Qatar as it happens. So that is already there. And just to remind you that Israel decided to break the deal that was reached in January on the 18th of March by resuming military operations in Gaza. So it's certainly there were options for negotiations. It didn't have to be this way. And as a result, we are seeing a catastrophic situation in Gaza. And remember, when we also talk about these 77 days of blockade, you're talking about a population, 2.3 million people living under occupation, who have already endured hell for the last 19 months, whose health system has been utterly decimated. The World Health Organization has calculated since the 7th of October 686 Israeli attacks on health facilities and ambulances. There is barely a health system left in Gaza. So what we are seeing now is massive malnutrition, including over 50 children have died from malnutrition. That figure is going to go up and pretty rapidly unless really serious efforts to get aid in are taken. And the proposals that are being put forward certainly don't meet that, because the only way getting aid in properly at scale is through the UN agencies who have been operating in Gaza, who have the aid at the border, but not by way of what Israel is pushing forward, which would be militarily controlled bubbles within Gaza that wouldn't be able to get enough aid in, but also wouldn't be adhering to basic global humanitarian principles that you provide aid not on the basis of politics, but to those in need, regardless. So It really is dire, and I don't think we have seen enough effort from the international community to bring this to a close. The world is watching and doing nothing.
I was going to ask you about the international community because both a lot of people within Israel and most international leaders are not supportive of what Israel is doing in Gaza right now, and yet that doesn't seem to matter.
Well, we actually had our own Prime Minister Keir Starmer in the middle of March saying that the blockade was unacceptable. So 2 months later on, I think the question is, do you just continue with press releases and statements saying that, or do you actually put meaningful pressure on? Because this is not what is happening. We have not seen, for example, we haven't even hauled the Israeli ambassador in for a dressing down. There are so many actions that governments like Britain should have been taking to exert real and meaningful pressure on Israel, because quite frankly, making statements from the dispatch box is not going to cut it. We've seen that time and time again. That's not pressure on Israel at all. Netanyahu needs to know that there are consequences for what he is doing, and that we need to see governments spelling it out, that this is a massive violation of international law and that there should be accountability. You can't collectively punish a civilian population. So all the crimes of Hamas, for sure, we all know about them, but you cannot punish civilians, men, women, and children for that. And that is what's going on. And it's a clear, stark violation of international law. And we should be saying that there are consequences.
Chris, thank you. Chris Doyle, Director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding and commentator on Middle East politics here on LBC News.